So this is a shoot that I did for a company called Pure Majik. We did a bunch of different images, but I really like this image because I feel like sometimes people have a hard time concepting how to shoot group shots. So let's break it down. This is the shot. All right, so there's a bunch of different things happening in this image that are kind of subtly at play at all times. We have a bunch of different people, right? We also have a bunch of different complexions, right? So the fact that this young lady has a lighter complexion than this young lady and different from this young lady, and then she has a lighter complexion and he has a lighter complexion, right? All of these things are things that I'm paying attention to, and I may not even bring attention to it to the people, but I'm looking at it, right? And the reason why that matters is because depending on where they're placed at, that also affects how my light is going to fall off. My light source is coming from over here, right? The primary or the key light is coming from over here. That key light, essentially, as it travels in this direction, the value of the light kind of diminishes, meaning that it's super bright here. All right, let me try to do this. So like it's super bright here. Then as it continues to travel, it actually gets to like this. And then by the time it gets all the way over to the far side, it's like this. Right? So just to kind of go back again, what I'm saying is, let me go with this, is that it'll start here, right? And then as the light travels, it gets a little softer, and then by the time it gets here, it gets a little softer. The reason why that matters is because the value of light on her is different than the amount of light that's needed on her. I don't want the same amount of light on everybody that's on here, but I want it to kind of read as though it is the same. Now, normally what you might see is, or what you might expect is a person would basically, if I'm the photographer down here, you basically put a light right over my head in this area and then allow the light to just fall flat on everybody. But what I think that does is it becomes this kind of unflattering light, and I don't think that it does what you feel like it's doing. So what I want to do is still give the light a little bit of an angle or perspective. So I'm making the light come from this side over here, and I'm allowing it to fall off or taper off as it travels to this side so that I can try to get her exposure and her exposure to feel like they're somewhat similar, despite the fact that she has much darker skin tones than she does. Actually, both of these ladies have darker skin tones than these two ladies do, right? So the objective is to have a light source that's, one, large enough so that when it starts to emit the light, it'll give me enough light when it gets here. It's okay if it falls off around here, but by the time it gets over here, that's when it starts to be at a level that flattens out for these two ladies right here. All right, so let me erase this. Let's start over again a little bit. So what that means to me is when I'm looking at this, I still want these two ladies or these two to actually get enough light. So I end up having something over here that essentially is able to take the light that's traveling from this direction and give me enough return so that I can get some of this light that's hitting here, right? Now, in addition to having my key light that's happening over here, I'm using these foam cores or V-flats as my fill to bounce or return some of that light back onto my subjects. But I also want to make sure that the overall scene or the overall environment isn't lost and it's too dark, so it makes it look a little too spotlighty. So what I did was I flew a scrim that's basically over the top of everybody, and that scrim is kind of doing double duty. What it's doing is creating kind of a flat light that emits onto the background, and then it's also providing light onto the models as well. So what I'm doing is I'm using that overhead light, which you can look at right here, and I'm allowing it to basically go through a scrim to create a diffusion of light over the entire set. So if you look, you might see some of that highlight on the top of her arm, some of the highlight there. You might see a little bit actually in the crown of her head. There's a little bit of light there. You get a little sheen right here. Some of that sheen right here as well. All of that is coming from this overhead light that basically is both on top of them and shining light behind them, which is why you kind of see this brighter hot spots around here, and then it starts to vignette up in here, vignette over here, even kind of gets a little darker on this entire side actually, right? So you have the key light that's providing my overall light on my subjects coming from this side. You have a bounce light. Actually, switch colors real quick. You got a bounce that's returning light from here. And then you have an overhead light that's essentially illuminating the entire scene, but not at a level that's bright enough to actually expose the entire image. Just enough so that the background is at a similar quality of light as the overall scene. And then by default, it actually ends up giving you a few these kind of slight kisses of light so that you're able to see the sheen in some of these areas. Also, something else that I'm trying to do with their shape is create this kind of like subtle curve. I don't know if you can tell from the actual image, but the idea is that she is my center point, right? I know not like necessarily center in the frame. And then the objective is for her, right, to be slightly ahead of her, right? And then he pokes his head out to be slightly ahead of her. And then she is slightly ahead of him. And then she is slightly ahead of her. So what that does is it makes sure that nobody's light is blocked. Obviously, this little one is by itself, so nobody's going to block his light. But the objective is that to make the form that they're sitting feel natural, but at the same time, make sure that she doesn't get blocked from the person that feels like they're in front of her. He doesn't get blocked from the person that's in front of him, and so on and so on. So here's how that light actually played out in real life. You see my reverse octave with the overhead and the V flats and the scrim. The key light was that light motive, which I was running a Profoto D2 in that was going up to 1,000 watt seconds. I'm not going to say that I used it at 1,000 watt seconds, but that was the power output. You can see how the V flats basically were on the opposite side of that so that they could return some of that light in so it wasn't a complete shadow. Then overhead, I have this 7-foot umbrella running the Pro 7A pack that does 2,400 watt seconds through this 12 by 12 scrim so that I could illuminate the entire set as well as that background and make sure that I got that highlight that was on the model's hair as well as some of their arms. And if you find breakdowns of lighting setups like this interesting, you should really check out my lighting recipe guide. It's a step-by-step book that basically shows you how to recreate some of my favorite lighting setups in the studio. I'll show you the setup, I'll show you the lighting I used, I'll tell you where to place it at, and I'll tell you what to look for once you've made your placements. You can find out more information about it in the description of this video. Peace.